So I've seen the first two sessions of General Conference, and some things that have stuck out to me, is that I feel like conferences, the structure and the content of conference has done a lot of things to kind of distance itself from a Trumpian stereotype of republicanism. So lots of times the church is viewed as a very conservative institution. A lot of members of the church are Republican. Utah, where a vast majority of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are, where there's a high density of members of the church. The Church of Jesus Christ has a lot of Republicans, and it usually votes Republican. And so there's a strong association that the church, through this general conference, and I think through lots of other efforts, has tried to distance itself from its association with republicanism, and especially Trumpian republicanism. It came out in support of refugees, and it's come out, and there were a couple of comments about refugees in this conference. This conference also, they've highlighted lots of multicultural elements, just the fact that the gospel of Christ is a worldwide church. For example, they had a multicultural choir from people from lots of different countries. They had speakers who spoke from other countries, from other assignments. They talked about COVID. They rejected kind of the COVID's not serious thing, or the vaccinations are bad. They've rejected that narrative. They've made a point to point out that everyone in the conference center is vaccinated. They did social distancing. People are wearing masks. General authorities are wearing masks when they're not speaking from the pulpit. They've tried to distance themselves from ideas of that only men are supposed to be able to speak. That was never really a thing in General Conference, but they had both of the closing prayers for the first two sessions were women speakers spoke in all of the sessions. There was even a 70, Clark Gilbert, who, when he was talking about, he had a message that talked about where we start in life. He used the idea of slope and intercept, the mathematical idea, as an analogy to life. And he said, what doesn't really matter, your intercept, where you start off in life, doesn't really matter. What matters is the slope, your rate of change and your direction of change. So if you're familiar with those mathematical concepts, that will make sense to you, and that's that analogy. But in the graphics, to illustrate his slope and his intercept, the intercept had a dark-skinned woman bottom who's starting with more disadvantages in life, kind of an acknowledgement, a graphical acknowledgement of perhaps racism and systemic racism. And it had a lighter-skinned woman starting off higher off in life. And the dark-skinned woman's graphic slope was going up, and the lighter-skinned woman's her slope was going down. And it was just an illustration, and he didn't actually comment about it, but it was direct enough that it stuck out, at least to me. And I think it stuck out to several people. Just that idea that showing, okay, here's a darker skinned woman who's starting with more disadvantages, but whose slope, at least in the gospel sense, is going up. And yeah, so I think that the church is trying to distance itself from that because it is becoming more of a worldwide church. The vast majority of members aren't Republican, because the vast majority of members aren't even citizens of the United States. They live outside the United States. And the church wants to be an international organization, and it's moving towards that. It's moving towards it slowly, but it is moving towards that. And gestures like the ones that they do in General Conference, distancing themselves from Trumpian republicanism, I think are good. I think illustrating where the church stands on various issues is important. And so even though a lot of their members are Republican, and I am in fact Republican, I'm registered Republican, and I'm involved in party politics, I appreciate that the church isn't, and that the church does make very strident Republicans uncomfortable on several occasions. And I think that this conference will make at least the Republicans that are opposed to vaccination and the Republicans that don't believe in COVID would make them uncomfortable. I don't really perceive strong levels of sexism and racial prejudice in the Republican groups that I interact with, but if that is an issue, it would make them uncomfortable too. It'd be hard to reconcile being a believing member of the Church of Jesus Christ and also having sexist and or racist views. So anyways, that's one of my impressions from conference.